Nice. Okay, cool. Well, good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode of the AWS Plug. This is going to be our first evening where we are hosting this remote. This is not a live in-person audience on camera. This is a remote from our houses due to the coronavirus issue that is currently plaguing us. So tonight we have Mr. Bart Castle. Oh, actually, first, couple of show notes. Please get in on the conversation. If you are in the audience tonight, then you can just unmute yourself and ask a question willy-nilly. If that gets out of hand, then we will stop that, and we'll make sure that everybody is nice and taking turns and asking questions. We will try to make sure that we moderate questions. I've seen Bart has had a couple of study groups before. He does a fantastic job at them, and so I asked him to come on tonight. So have a little chat for anybody that is interested. Since we are all sitting at home, we can now study for AWS certifications that we have been pushing off potentially in the past. And AWS is now allowing us to take our exams from the house as well. There is a little bit of a process with that. You have to speak to the proctor first, and you have to take a picture of your environment to make sure that you're not cheating. Bart, have you actually gone through that process, or have you chatted with anybody that's gone through the process?
Yeah, I took the Cloud Practitioner like 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to take the Solutions Architect Thursday, actually.
Nice. And was it onerous? Was it a big deal?
I realized as I was taking the pictures that I had not well prepared my environment. I was like, moving lamps and dogs and pets and sundry all sorts of things out of the way. So once I had gotten the room generally clean and well lit, it was fine. Even with me here in the studio, they wouldn't let me use OBS or any of my other little webcam tricks. They made me clear all that stuff out. So that was a little bit upfront. So I would advise you give yourself a few extra minutes. Like they tell you 15, but I'd give you 20, 30 minutes before your appointment, just to make sure your stuff's all set up. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Yeah. Thanks for the heads up. All right. So, like I said, this is the Pug. And tonight we have Mr. Bart Castle. He's going to talk to us about certification exam prep. Feel free to tweet to him on Twitter. Send him pictures of himself and make fun of him. He really enjoys that.
Well, that's right.
And we have our polling results in. In the audience now, we have 25% that are currently AWS certified, but I'm assuming they're here to learn something more about the testing process. 30% are not certified, and for a whopping 45% are pursuing it, which is our sweet spot for our audience.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Awesome. Well, yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for the intro,
Take it away, Mr. Castle.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just want to say thanks to the Pug group out there. I hope everybody's staying safe and staying sane at home there. Chris, I'll go ahead and switch over to, I'll present here in a minute once I get going. Cool. So yeah, friends, just kind of joining up with the group here. I chatted with Chris on Twitter there. I am an AWS trainer for CBT Nuggets, and I've been training with AWS for quite a few years now. Before I came to CBT Nuggets and became their AWS trainer, I was working with Global Knowledge, and Global Knowledge was one of the first companies in the US to retail any of the AWS training material from AWS. So that gave me a chance to kind of become one of the first AWS trainers in the country that was official authorized instructor teaching their material, which is a complete pleasure for me. I got to tell you guys, what AWS does in their product catalog is matched in no small way by what they do with all their information too. I mean, the DIY, the self-service, the documentation, the API reference guides, all that stuff is an immaculate secondary effort to the things that we buy and use with them. So for me, it's always been one of the biggest sales pitches. I love what they do, but I love how they enable me to do it even more. And I think their exam and training world is no different from that. I hope that you guys have similar experiences with it. So, coming to CBT Nuggets, I had a unique opportunity to begin creating training material based on pretty much anything that I want to do, whatever my experiences had been. I was working as a consultant throughout my whole time as a contract trainer and clientele that I was working with. Did a lot of spin-offs from students that I would have. We'd go into little side projects. And so coming to CBT Nuggets, I had a chance to kind of build my own curriculum around it. And so that's just a little bit of background about myself. Before I got into all of this instructing, I was a network administrator in a software development shop in Oregon. We ran virtual machines, we got into containers, we started using AWS pretty early on to expand our development environment, playgrounds, sandboxes, and things like that. So a lot of fun wins at an interesting time when virtualization was coming around. All that set me up to be pretty much a lifelong fan of AWS now, continuing on into the future. So what I wanted to kind of chat with you guys a little bit about tonight, and again, Chris and Chris, it's easy to keep track of. We appreciate everybody kind of joining up tonight. I thought we could start first by just chatting a little bit about why would we pursue an AWS certification as opposed to going with Azure or going with Linux or Windows or just something else that might be a different avenue. We have many certification options. After that, I thought maybe we could chat a little bit about why in particular one of the certs might be right for you. Because there's a big difference between job roles and the exam that you might get. Some of you might have run into this as well. So I thought we could chat about that a little bit. And of course, take questions along the way from anybody. I am keeping an eye on the chat window over here. So if you have a message, go ahead and just shoot it on in there.
Actually, yeah, Cater raised his hand and he has a question. Cater, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, go for it.
Or did he accidentally hit the raise your hand button?
I'm going to assume that one. I will lower the hand now, and if he re-raises it, we can address again.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, no problem, friends. And just reach out, help, whatever you got there. We'll pause and we'll take a little question break there. And then kind of one of the last things is try to steer you guys towards some study material and resources that are available that AWS makes for us. So I thought we could start off first by taking a look at kind of the AWS story. And so the first thing I wanted to share here is an interesting, a little icon. So how many of you, maybe show of hands or in the chat window, how many of you have checked out some sort of a Gartner report before? You can tell us what's a Gartner, what does that look like? What does that look like for you guys? And remember the chat one, okay, Kanji, a couple folks dialing in there, Dave as well. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I love Gartner. Good stuff. So Gartner kind of makes a profession out of going and evaluating services and providing some sort of a metric. They're particularly famous for what's known as the Magic Quadrant. I don't have my sparkle effects here tonight, but you can kind of imagine how that might work. So I'm going to turn my screen share on, and I'm going to show you guys the Magic Quadrant because it's a pretty special little diagram. All right, let me get this closed down. So essentially what the Magic Quadrant is showing here, and hopefully this isn't too small for everybody. Let me know if it's...
No, it looks good. It's perfect.
Okay, cool. So the Magic Quadrant is all about showing ability to execute against vision. Okay, and you can kind of recognize that there's a difference between having a great idea and not pulling it off, having all of the skills and resources to execute it, and a terrible plan. Okay, and that is basically the quantum that they're trying to create across this diagram. So in the top right-hand corner, you have leaders who have vision and have ability to execute. Okay, and that puts AWS, Microsoft, and Google as the top quadrant. And this was as of July in 2019. So this is fairly up to date. Okay, now you look down in the bottom ones, you see Oracle, IBM, Alibaba Cloud, and in particular, this one is about infrastructure as a service. There you go. A couple folks dialing on that. Yeah. So when we say infrastructure as a service, friends, we're talking about some of the lower level types of componentry. You're talking about virtual networks, virtualized workloads, and AWS, this would be EC2, hypervisor style services. Okay. Very different than when you get into things like software as a service, a la Office 365, Adobe Creative Cloud, very different kind of dynamics there so far. So when we talk about why would we be interested in certifying with AWS, we got to kind of ask ourselves a few questions here. So I'm going to pitch this to you guys. Is there anybody out there that feels like AWS created the cloud? They created cloud computing. Would anybody go so far as to say that? Any of my Chris's, would we jump on that if it floated by?
I definitely don't think so. I don't think I would agree with that statement.
Okay, good, good. I like that. Okay, nobody's chiming in on the chat, so that's good. Nobody's been swayed that way. Well, that's absolutely a great thing to say about it. Now, we want to recognize that when we define cloud computing, okay, it's not a single technology. So it's not like you can say AWS made this technology first. Okay, so what do you think it is when people tie AWS to the cloud so much? Anybody want to venture a guess why we would say that, or at least have that sentiment, especially as you move farther away from the IT circles? Okay, so maybe it was a timing sort of discussion. I think there's certainly some elements of that there as well. I see Wentz timing in there. The elephant in the room. Yeah, we'll get to that part there, Dave. What about you, Chris's? You guys got any guesses here? Why would we possibly feel like AWS created it? Maybe there's a sentiment towards that.
So just for edification for the after the recording finishes, I don't know if the text box is going to show up in the recording. So if we want to answer a question from the or speak to a response from there, let's say it out loud for the recording too.
Gotcha, Chris. Sure. I'd say it's the one that really made it production worthy. That's a response coming in from the chat panel. I've used all three. Yes. Okay. And Brian's pointing to the general maturity of their services in their portfolio. Okay. I think you guys are all perfectly on the right page. One of the things you got to remember is that like towards the end of the 90s and in the early 2000s, enterprise virtualization was the hot new technology. But right around the same time, we saw Amazon Web Services beginning to offer virtualization as a service in a big way. So we saw people kind of interested in similar technologies, but with very, very different acquisition models. So at a time when people were beginning to foot the big virtualization bill, you have AWS offering this like salad bar model where you could go and just kind of have some of it and use it, very low entry, very low cost, and of course it's all self-service. So those are really stark contrasts to the two things that were playing out and kind of shaping the IT industry at the time. And I think to Brian's point, you're right. AWS was there in a bigger way, especially in the managed services offering. So ultimately, in the end, I think that's one of the big reasons why people have so much weight. There is so much inertia behind AWS that at a bare minimum, they generate gravity and the rest of the industry has to kind of circulate them because of the maturity level that they have there. And of course, I absolutely love Azure and Google Cloud, but you do have to recognize just how much time AWS had. You're talking almost a solid decade before these guys really began to compete with them. And that was a really big advantage, especially when you pair it up with things like DevOps and some of the agile mentalities that AWS was heavily embracing, which meant that when they pushed their gas pedal down, they went farther, faster, and more efficiently than the other companies were doing at the time as well. So these are all really big factors behind why it's worth certifying with them and why they're possibly one of the more future-proof and future-ready organizations out there. I feel like the team structures and the enablement that's there allows these guys to continue participating. So any thoughts, questions, comments on any of that? I'd love to hear from Chris or anybody else who wants to chime in.
Why are you always picking on me about this? It's definitely.
I love it.
Oh, you meant the other Chris. Perfect. Awesome. Mr. Planky, go ahead. Weigh in.
Good scapegoat there for you. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that really drives me towards AWS and not some of the other providers is how easy it is to get in touch with the engineers and the advocates of the platform. You know, there are people on Twitter and they're real people that you're able to reach out to. They're willing to take product ideas, willing to take pull requests on a lot of their services and things like that. So the community around it's really just made it easy to dive in and really get a good feel for what's going on. And it makes you feel like you made the right choice when we are able to contribute back to the platform that you're using. So those are some of the things that keep me going to AWS every day.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, the open source contributions, their alignment with the open source industry is definitely an interesting factor behind it. I think that really helps the ease of innovation part and the ease of access part as well.
One of the things that kind of drew me to it. So I don't come from the developer background. I came from the operations background. And for me, building in AWS from an ops perspective was I'm not going to say significantly easier, but more intuitive to my brain type. I mean, I'm bending now more towards, DevOps and the role of infrastructure as code and everything.
Sure.
But the ability to like build out the VPC and, stack the load balancers in there kind of spoke to my mindset. Now that I've got that baseline, looking at the other clouds is significantly easier, but I see how the other clouds from my perspective are significantly more developer focused.
Yeah, and that is extremely prevalent when you look at Google Cloud, of course.
Right.
The sophistication of their developers kits is wildly beyond what many of the other teams are doing out there. Really interesting stuff. And of course, we look at the APIs and the service architecture that they're creating there. And it's built for various specific types of workloads now. And I love that. I love seeing these guys diversify at the same time while they specialize. It's kind of interesting to see that happen. So here, Dave chimed in, our corporate IT has selected AWS for 90% and Azure when licensing is cheaper. Yeah. And, you know, I think one of the most important parts of the whole cloud experience, and the reason I really try to sidebar on some of this for you guys is that when you're talking about being an AWS architect, developer, sysops engineer, DevOps guy, a big part of it is still winning teams over and establishing the evangelical parts of being a cloud champion. So that's part of why I'm tangenting on this just a little bit here. But yes, there is no rule that says we have to use one vendor. And one of the best things about this is that we're supposed to tie IT back to business value in a bigger way than maybe we've been able to do in many years prior. And so I think when you look at that, that is part of the power and flexibility that managed cloud services as an industry offer, and why it's so important that we have many different competitive offerings in that space. Especially look at Microsoft running all that Red Hat stuff up there this year. It's pretty wild to see Linux replacing Azure as the predominant workload running in this Microsoft data center. So it's really a pretty wild dynamic shift that we're seeing out there. And organizations that seek out the value propositions are going to be the most successful in this, who aren't afraid to slice up the cloud pie. But then again, that's where all of our folks listening in tonight, that's where we all come in. We're the integrators and the tool that the business needs to make sure that we can keep all those clouds working together. And to that point, many of us are not going to be single cloud people. We're going to go on to work with many cloud vendors, and I think it should rightfully be that way. Yeah. Okay, Cater had a question. I'm new to AWS. What do you think I should do first, and how to be prepared for the exam? Okay, great. So now that we understand a little bit about the cloud sales pitch, Cater, let me jump into that a little bit for you here as well. We get a little bit about the AWS part. We recognize that they're innovators, okay, they're leaders, they support the open source model as well. And I think we know that IT is chock full of change. They appear to have built a pretty rock solid ship that is designed to handle change. And I really appreciate Chris Planky bringing up the feedback part of it. Because when you look at Agile and you look at ITIL, and you look at those process management systems, okay, key part is that feedback cycle. You cannot have continuous improvement without feedback. And I think AWS really kind of religiously bake that into a lot of what they do. Yeah, so kudos to Chris for calling that out, because I appreciate that one as well. Now, when I take a look at the AWS catalog itself, let me jump over there. Hide that one. Cool. And if we take a look at the certification offerings, some of you probably have these certs. How many of you have a professional or a specialty certification? I'm curious across the team. Maybe just throw something in the chat window if you have a pro or specialty. If everybody's just kind of looking through the end. Cool. All right, well, I'll keep an eye out for some of those as well. Now, you'll notice the foundational, and then you've got kind of some arenas that they've broken this up into, okay? When we talk about the Cloud Practitioner, I just want to make sure we know which exams are which here. The Cloud Practitioner is largely designed for people who are very, very new to the cloud, looking to understand the AWS catalog because they want to pursue further technical positions, but also very importantly designed for business professionals who support IT infrastructure and processes and project management. Because remember, they speak these languages with their technical teams. And if they don't have the proficiency, then that's going to degrade a lot of the integration and the synergy that the teams have. So keep in mind, the Cloud Practitioner is one part business designed and facing, and another part intro tech. The reason I try to bring this up is because I meet a lot of people who look at the chart and they're like, I need to start at that one. And I do want to encourage you to consider maybe looking at one of the other associate exams first, because the Cloud Practitioner is like the Salt Lake. It's wide and shallow. Okay, so you're looking at almost all of the same services that you're going to touch in the associate exam, but you're not going into as much detail. It's more like, what are they used for, rather than how do you deploy the scaling group and the load balancer? And those are slightly different levels of detail. I just kind of want to give you a little bit of insights on that one as well. Okay, cool. We do have some folks with the Pro Architect, very good, security. Okay. Yeah, so Al, when I hear people say very little experience with AWS, I just want to be careful here. The Cloud Practitioner is not a generic cloud certification. It is very much about knowing AWS products. So when I think about people who are really new to the cloud and what's most valuable to them, the CompTIA certs are pretty excellent to get started. They have the Net Plus and the Cloud Plus. Those are really kind of boilerplate raw technology certs. So these are going to be something you'd want to pursue because you want that AWS path. So I just try to add a little distinction there as well. Okay, I saw a couple other questions coming in. Honestly, I thought dev was the easiest. SysOps was the hardest for me. Okay, is the price for the exam same for each type? So the cloud practitioner is $100 to take that one. The associates are all $150, and then the professionals, I believe, are up to $300 now. And as far as I know, that has not changed through the e-testing part of it that's going on right now. The last time I booked, when I booked the architect earlier this week, it was 150 still. So that looks right.
Yeah, so Bart, I think the reason I asked that question is because if I recall correctly, when I took my cloud practitioner, one of the perks of taking that was I got a credit for my next exam. So I think that was financially a lower barrier to entry. And there was a little bit of the perks of you got the discount for a future exam, and then I also got access to an AWS like perks store. With like some swag, a pin, some stickers, you know, the stuff developers really care about. So,
well, you know, it polishes things up nicely on the side. People like that. Yeah, no, so I don't know that program is 100% active still. When I took my cloud practitioner just like a couple weeks ago, they didn't give that to me, but it could have been because of I had other certs and I didn't enroll in that program. So I would definitely check that out if this is your first exam, because it is a nice boon to get that credit on there. And I have no shame. I like swag. It's good stuff. Okay, if you are new, which one should you take first? So, Cater, I'm pointing out that the cloud practitioner, first of all, is not required to take the associates. I think it's a good starting point. It is a fairly sizable chunk of information to bite off. Okay, you're talking about at least 40 or 50 different services that you're going to be familiar with across the AWS portfolio by the time you're done prepping for that. When you look at what the associate exams are doing, you're not adding more services, you're adding more depth. So I don't want to sway your opinion. I just want to make sure that you understand the depth part of it there. Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind that practitioner was largely built to make sure that we're supporting the other teams who are not as technical, but still need to understand what these things are that are showing up on their bill and why it's an important factor for their teams. So an important dual purpose there, but it also makes them kind of pull the detail level back just that much. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, cool. Great. So when we think about the job roles, architect, ops, and developer, we do want to recognize that architecting is not the same thing as administration. And that's the only push that I try to make here. If you feel like you want to build and deploy and manage, while the architect is wildly popular in the industry, it's not as targeted to actual doing and building and maintaining. That's the SysOps administrator exam. It's going to be built more towards things like that. The developer, though, is probably my favorite one out of the whole piece, because they're the ones that focus the most on the API calls, the system developer kits, the command line tools, the deployment practices. It's kind of some of the funner, more interesting things for me, which are actually still pretty administrative in a lot of ways. That being said, the solutions architect is the one that I really like, because it's almost a social one. You have to know how to gather information and pull requirements out of people who maybe don't know what it is that they require in their solution to begin with. There's often a lot of, can I get more info here? I really don't have enough to be able to pitch this plan to you yet. There's a lot of discovery there, which is very different than the administrative implementation, integrative work of some of the other roles there. So that's just a good little pitch across the basic role architectures there. That being said, a lot of people do pursue all the associate exams together because they really do complement one another pretty well. Learning the command line and SysOps and developer is going to help you with any admin work, but understanding the value and the problem solving and solutions alignment parts of the architect is going to make sure that you get the right value proposition with the other work that we're doing out there. So any questions or comments or thoughts so far about what we've talked about with the certifications or the AWS track? We'll pause for a minute.
Definitely a lot of agreement in the audience. A lot of questions about, you know, there's a lot of good questions, a lot of validation of what you've said, and agreement.
Nice. I am trying to read through them as they come in. Excellent. I found the developer associate course harder than expected. Oh, yeah, that's true, Brian. And on the later editions of it, they do get into a little bit more of the mobile app parts and some game performance, but it wasn't a huge percentage of it. You're right, though. Yeah. One thing I do want to mention, since right now the solutions architect, many of you might be aware of a transition that's happening with the exam. The C01 was their first generation. It was technically version 4 of the exam. And then C02 has just been released as of March. And so first of all, I would say that if you've prepared for the C01 and you haven't booked the exam yet, just go ahead and book the C02. There's a ton of overlap there. They did very little actual removal of content and really kind of focus more on restructuring the kind of the domains of study. So I would encourage you to go for the later one. But keep in mind too, AWS did extend all existing certification expirations. So if you're renewing, for anybody that's out there, those got all bumped out, which I thought was kind of nice because my DevOps one was expiring in April. And I was a little behind with the COVID-19 outbreak. I wasn't really feeling like sitting for that one yet. So push that out here a little bit longer and go and sit for that one. Okay, great. So keep in mind, look for the C02. That was kind of my last little pitch on that part. Now, as far as the pro exams and then into the specialty, I would really encourage you to either be very interested in pursuing these because you want to continue learning and developing your AWS skills. But from a career perspective, I would look to specialize when there is a role in your company that's like on the horizon that would, really support your decision there. Just from a person kind of getting started out, until there's something to kind of justify the other ones in there, it's a lot of work to get there without necessarily a bigger lift beyond it. So I see a lot more established folks who use those to leverage specialty positions within their organization. So kind of keep that in mind as well. Now, one of the things I wanted to kind of get into then after that was looking at the resources that we could use. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I love AWS's products and services, but their information catalog is just as powerful. And so for me, their product documentation and their API guides are the holy grail of how to use AWS. So as much as I love all the training material that's flying around all over the place, even the stuff that I create, I still spend more of my productive time using API guides and user guides than any other piece of training material that's out there. So I really can't express that enough because you've got to get in there, get yourself an account, and don't spin your wheels, get a project going, something that's like tutorial based. I usually use the AWS blog. In fact, let me jump on over there real quick. If you take a look on blog.aws, they have their AWS blog site broken into different specialties. So you could take out infrastructure. Oh, I saw an A Cloud Guru question come in, especially because of the exam simulator they have for many. Yeah, absolutely, Brian. A Cloud Guru has got a top-notch offering that they have available there. I think their lab offerings are pretty excellent, and the exam prep guides are a great way for people to really validate their understanding. Keep in mind, AWS has some great exam prep and validation pieces I'm going to show you here right now that are freely available too. And I always love free add-ons. Plus, they're coming directly from the proverbial horse's mouth, which is always nice. Except for when it's not. So if I were you, what I do is I jump out onto the blog and begin looking at some smaller topics like infrastructure, maybe looking at some of the servers list products, or maybe looking at data stores, and you're going to find lots of great tutorials to help you lab things up. Now, if you take a look at a product as you're kind of training along, like just the other day I was doing a lesson on Macy. And so if you take a look at Amazon Macy's.
We still see your presentation screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on a sec. I put it on app sharing instead of screen. Let me fix it real quick.
Which is always a smart move until it's not. Then you forget.
Yeah, totally forgot it. Okay, so what I was going to say there is that, as you're watching whatever it is you watch my training material, you're at A Cloud Guru, and you hit a product and you're trying to understand it more. One of the first things I try to get people to look at is, of course, digging into the documentation for it. And when you go out to, say, Macy here, and you take a look at their resources on documentation, you're typically going to find things broken into two different categories. So there'll be, come on, where is it? Yeah, the user guide and then the API reference. Now, the user guide is going to be human-friendly, nice and readable, meant to be kind of the walk-through user manual of what these products do, the many actions. Often there's a lot of tutorials and scenarios built right into the user guide. So definitely a great place to start. But when you get later on and you're kind of familiar with the products, life switches more towards the API reference, because this is where they're looking at the actual API calls themselves, what action you can perform, how you actually pass data back and forth with the service. So this is where stuff gets a lot more technical and a lot more specific to the invocations you're trying to perform. knowing where to find these and how to dig into them and which one's going to be appropriate is going to serve you a long way throughout your whole AWS adventure. So hands down, the best stuff coming from AWS, lots of great documentation from those guys. So I really want to push that out there. Okay. And if you guys have any questions or not, go ahead and throw them up in the chat. I did want to mention the AWS blog. I'm sorry, I forgot to screen share that. But like the security blog's a great example. If you get on their blog, they were just talking about a variety of pieces like the TLS rollout that's going on, getting rid of some of the old TLS standards. A couple of examples like automatic logging with access control lists. That's just a great little blog article where they're going to run through how to build it and the services that are used as a part of the solution. Really great stuff. Cool. Any questions or comments so far? I just want to take a pause and make sure everybody's not overwhelmed.
No, no. Everybody seems to be good.
I think there were a couple of questions. Just any thoughts you had about the specialty certs?
Oh, I missed that one on there. Okay, we saw the O2 and O1. Great. If you get certified, how long does it last before you need to renew? Kimberly, my understanding is that it's still a 3-year renewal, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's 3 years now.
Yep. And let's see here. What are my thoughts on the specialty certs? So yeah, I'm pretty excited about the specialty certifications. I will tell you some of these are pretty far removed from your day-to-day work. Like I don't personally have the Alexa Builder or the machine learning certifications because they're pretty specific. When you talk about what types of things you're going to do in AWS, if you're not working in those particular niches, pursuing those exams are going to provide very little career return for you. So I just kind of point that one out. That being said, advanced networking is going to be very powerful, especially when you're working with hybrid and WAN architectures. A lot of great BGP balancing content in there, a lot of direct connect content in there. It's a very technical certification. It's definitely one of the trickier ones if you don't have, a ton of networking background already. I love the security course. I think it's honestly one of my favorite courses that I used to teach because when you talk about cloud, security is always at the top, right? People are always concerned about it. It's one of the biggest perceived problems in the cloud. So that security cert really focuses on some of the best products and services at AWS to help provide detective, protective, and reactive controls, which in my mind are some of the coolest parts of AWS, like the ability to monitor, discover events, respond to them, the types of event-based architectures that you could build with it. I think in a lot of ways, it's some of the funner, actionable things that you can build and deploy in AWS. So really enjoy that cert. The last one I'd leave you with, data analytics and database. These two certs used to be a single one. It was big data, and it was a big topic. So they broke this into two different specialties. When you look at data analytics, you're going to be talking about Elastic MapReduce and Redshift, classic data warehousing, kind of extract, load, and transform processes. Very useful for that particular niche. I think they did a nice job removing some of the classic database parts of it. The database specialty, I think, is well-founded as well because of, just remember, friends, almost every IT story begins with a database story. And I don't mean a database story, I mean a data-based story about manipulating data, using data, maintaining it. And this one particularly does a great job of making sure that we understand how all of the many data stores at AWS work, and of course, how to make that solutions alignment. Tell us a database story. Well, back in my day, we didn't have databases. Yeah. No, there's, I tell you what, if you really want to hear a great one about serverless databases, I'm a real big fan of the serverless chats from Jeremy Daly. And he did one on serverless databases a couple of episodes back, somewhere in like episode 41, 45. It was a great look at why it's crazy to think of building your own database right now and some of the key indicators for when you should specialize a database and when to hybridize them. It was an awesome podcast. I would definitely encourage you to check that one out if you're looking for a good database story there, Chris.
Hey,
All right, cool. So continuing on our look at resources, the blogs are great. I showed you the documentation. Now, when I talked earlier on about becoming a cloud champion, what I was referring to there is someone who can elicit and understand requirements and technical pieces from their teams, but can also work with business players, C-level executives, directors, boards. Okay, these are operational and managerial players who don't speak the same language as technical teams. And so all of the resources that I've been showing you here, the documentation, the API guides, the blogs, the labs, okay, Those are all going to help us with the technical side of things. But in order to really understand some of the value proposition and how to fit cloud computing into the business, which is a big part of what we're trying to do here, that's where I encourage you to look at things like AWS's well-architected framework. Okay, and the WAF, you take a look online here, AWS well-architected. Currently, they host the framework out in the AWS Architecture Center, which is also a great resource. Okay? And the whole premise behind the well-architected framework was to say that the whole reason AWS started making AWS, or Amazon made AWS, is because they had gained a lot of expertise in their industry. And they realized that those skills were something that were marketable. That's really the biggest thing that they're selling there. It's not just the products, it's all that know-how and that managed layer on top of it. So the framework is a great place to go to understand what the best practices look like, what the considerations are that might drive you in a particular decision choice, and then of course, how to evaluate and improve these over time. So we're looking at operational excellence. You've got security on here, reliability, performance efficiency, and then cost optimization. And the cool thing about it is once you read these frameworks, you can take these principles and apply them to Azure, apply them to Google Cloud, apply them to running even some things in your on-prem infrastructure. And they're pulling from data and security and application design best practices all together in such an interesting blend. It really gets you a feeling for why AWS is so powerful. This sort of best practice is part of why we want to certify with them, because they really do set the standard in the industry for how to do these things and do these things well and at a scale that very few others are doing. So I really encourage you to take a look at the well-architected framework. Specifically, the associate exams use this basically as the backbone. So if you take the architect exam, it used to be built on those 5 pillars. Those were the 5 domains on the exam. So this is one of the most important resources you could get into. Everybody should read it. There's not that big. It's worth consuming. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at the framework. Any questions or thoughts so far?
You said used to be. Has the new one changed?
On the new one, they did not put in the operational excellence domain. They let that be a part of the other 4. Personally, for me, I'm fine with that because operational excellence, the one key theme is about continuous improvement right here. Boom, continually improving. So you can stuff that into all of the other 4. Your reliability should continually improve. Your security, your cost, your performance. All of those things should leverage operational excellence. So,
nice.
Yeah. So on the new exam, they don't have that particular domain, but rest assured the framework is absolutely the backbone of all of that knowledge we need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So if I were studying for the exam, I would cruise through the well-architected framework and I'd probably be like, oh, RDS, don't know that well enough. Elasticsearch, don't know that well enough. And I would be pulling out the glaring things that I'm missing. You can rest assured if it's in the framework, you're going to hear about it probably on the exam somewhere. Okay, so that's usually a pretty good resource. And the other one I try to get people to think about are the FAQs. So let's say that you ran into a problem with Elasticsearch. AWS Elasticsearch FAQs is a great resource. The frequently asked questions are just that. It's something that AWS runs into on a regular basis and has to provide distinctions on. So this is a great place to go if you don't want to read the entire user guide. You read this section, and they're going to give you some of the most important high-level pieces that you need to know, and in particular, exam-worthy material. So there's a lot of stuff that you're going to find that's perfectly distinguished on the FAQs for a product without you having to dig through a training material to find it, or trying to rig through the framework that I just showed you, or trying to read all the documentation yourself. So I like that. Really encourage people to keep the FAQs in mind. Thanks, Al. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining, buddy. So the FAQs were the other one that I usually point out. And that leaves us finally down to the AWS provided training material itself. And to find that, you can head over to aws.training. No .com, just .training. It's very hip. Okay. Down in here, you're going to find a couple of different resources. First of all, recognize that whenever you go to get certified, you're going to visit this portal and you're going to have to use it to register for your exam. So you're going to find yourself here at AWS Training at some point. Okay. If I sign in here now, it'll take me into my little certification portfolio. And the other one up here at the top is the Learning Library. Okay. And the Learning Library is just chock full of AWS curated and created content. Some of it are actual online training classes that you can take with an instructor. But the most important parts for me are all the e-learning parts of it. They've got some great documentation. And their exam prep courses are really, really well done. So let's say that I was looking for the architect So here's the architect. Okay, could jump down here to intermediate. Let's see, this in list mode. See if we can find prep on the page. Yeah, there are quite a few on here. Sometimes you have to filter it down a little bit farther.
Oh, nice.
Architecting.
While you're searching for that, I can add, when I took the Cloud Practitioner, they have a course on here. I believe it's 7 hours. And I took over the course of a weekend. And then I took my Cloud Practitioner on that following Tuesday. Like, our course was everything I needed to pass that particular exam. And you made the right of getting it from the horse's mouth. That really is that I found so appealing here was, here's a 7-hour course. Here's how to pass this exam. And then you go, and I took the exam in person. That's not the best mobilizable approach right around these times, but it was awesome to have that material from Amazon and then just be able to go take the exam from them as well.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I used to deliver the exam prep classes, and they were always my favorite ones because they were really, everybody was juicy and ready to get into the exam. And they were all prepped, had good questions, and they were just looking to kind of validate. This one I have on the screen here is the one that I took most recently. So exam readiness. And basically there's just little categories. And when you get into each one, they kind of talk about what that particular domain will look like. They give you sample questions and then explain how to answer the questions and do a quick little recap on some of the gotchas and little kind of mnemonic tricks for that particular domain. Really great stuff. When I go to create course material, this is a lot of what I use to help figure out what's most important. You know, obviously not ripping their slides, but obviously trying to understand what the arc is and some of the bigger points of it. And of course, I go take the exam too. Okay, saw a question come in. What are the requirements to be a trainer? Is there like a train the trainer course? Okay, well, Wentz, it used to work, it worked differently over the years. When I was with Global Knowledge, we had the training material, you had to have the cert, and you could go and teach it. But now there's what's called an AAI program, an AWS Authorized Instructor Program, and only a few people can do that. That means you're either training directly for AWS, you're working for their training department and you're delivering their material, or you're one of their training partners, which means a business partner authorization kind of relationship there. And then also a certification process for the trainer themselves. So they actually have to go and get certified as an AAI now. And the program's evolved over time, but I have a lot of friends who are AAIs that have stayed with AWS training partners. And it's a great program. So I still get to kind of live kind of parallel to them. And we share a lot of information between each other on the Slack channels. Very great resource. Yeah. Okay, great. So those are some of my favorite resources out there, friends. When it comes down to taking AWS exams, you want to keep in mind that a good amount of test taking practical skills will go very far on those exams. They do have a lot of those. One of these is not like the other tricks that'll work there. There are quite a few scenarios in which you're going to need to pick the solution that is not necessarily the most right, but the cheapest, or maybe the one that's the most secure, or maybe the one that has the highest level of durability. That's why I brought up the well-architected framework, because they really try to push some of that minutia. They're going to give you solutions sometimes where all of the answers fix the problem. And you're going to have to figure out, okay, well, which one is the best value given the certain requirements that they're looking at? So this is why it's not enough to just know what the services do. You really have to have that value and architectural look at it to understand why it's a better solution than one of the others, especially when you get into the pro certs for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. So let's see, what time is it here? We got 7:18. Oh yeah, look at that, 45 minutes.
Nice.
Rocking. Tell you what.
Yeah, a lot of the questions I found were like, what is the least bad option? There were like, you know, there were 4 solutions, and based upon, you know, best practices, you wouldn't pick any of them, but one of them is right, and so you kind of have to know, you know, the KB size of a database ingestion rate, and whether or not Redshift could actually do a thing or not do a thing, and then it would, you know, obviate some of the other answers, and then from the 2 answers that were left,
down to 2.
You'd have to pick the least worst answer.
Those ones are particularly frustrating because, like, none of this is best practice. None of this.
Right.
None of this follows the framework. But you know that it doesn't then. You can tell.
Nice.
Yeah, and I guess I want to put it out there too, friends. I do run a study group with CBT Nuggets that is free and publicly available. So if you're looking for some other resources, or if you just want to come and chat with me sometime about any of this, I run them currently every other week. And if you follow me out there on Twitter at CloudBart, I'd be happy to get you a subscription link. You can come and check it out and just join up. It's not like you have to, it's not behind our paywall or anything like that. You just register and come and hang out. We even let your own Chris Williams in. That's right.
They'll let anybody in there. It's ridiculous. Can you put the link up on the page right now?
Oh, for
yeah, for the people in the audience.
Oh yeah. So I'm over here on twitter.com/cloudbart. And if you take a look around on, oh, look at, I can type, here we go. Yeah, CloudBart. Yeah, and so there's CloudBart, and I share a lot of different things from different people about AWS. I'm really big on the serverless software development side right now. So I tend to share a lot of that. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and I have a YouTube site as well. And I tend to share a lot of content. Currently, I'm doing a video series on identity and access management lessons. They're just like little 2.5-minute videos. So if you take a look online, youtube.com/Bart Castle, you can subscribe, and I share a lot of AWS training material on there as well. And of course, just reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you about anything DevOps, cloud, AWS, training related, any of those things.
Amazing hats, you know, anything, really anything.
Yeah, dinosaurs. Where's my dinosaur at? You get him back out here. There we go. That's pretty fun. So I'm curious, Chris, and Chris Planky, what do you guys, what are you guys doing? I know Chris Williams a little bit on the side, but Planky, what do you do in the industry here? I'm
I'm a software developer for Liberty Mutual Insurance, heavily focused in the serverless and chatbot space. So really big focus on deflecting calls to call centers, and pretty much working fully in AWS using services like Lex, Lambda, Amazon Connect, which is a service not a lot of people have heard about, and one that might not necessarily be, sorry about that light in the background, so that's what I do, and then just outside a bunch of Alexa skills and things like that. I'm trying to get a little bit more into blogging with some of the Medium posts and things like that, but yeah, that's what I'm up to these days.
Oh, that's cool. Do you have like a
cameras back on? All right, let's do this.
Like a voice over IP background?
No, I don't. I came out of college and there was a job and I was a software developer and I liked voice technology, but it wasn't anything that I knew or workings of. And then I kind of got thrown into the industry and in the telephony space and learned, voice data is pretty much just over IP, like everything else you learned in school. So it was very exciting to actually know a lot about that without studying a lot about that. And I've just stayed pretty interested in it since then.
Yeah, the voice and the telephony and cloud space was a real weird, interesting space. I was in telephony for a long time. We wrote IVR applications at my last software development company. So we had a lot of fun with diverting calls from call centers, just like you said.
Yep.
But it's a weird spot still. There's so much crazy old telephone infrastructure that people are leveraging still. It blows my mind. They could have 80% of their workload running in the cloud, and they will have PRI circuits and things like that in their environments that they still maintain because it's totally reasonable and cost effective and it works.
Yeah, until you have to make all of your call center employees work from home during a pandemic, and you have to buy physical hardware to, support that and things like that. So definitely
Exactly.
An exciting time for people in that industry right now.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of heartburn happening there. Yeah, the IP solutions are very powerful, much more flexible.
So here's an interesting question from Wences. So to not become a dinosaur, AI, ML, or DevOps, IAC. That's a wide swath right there.
Wow. Well, I guess the way I would answer it is by keeping in mind that, first of all, like I said earlier, cloud is not as new as people think it is. A lot of the work that was done last year still exists. We still need to do those jobs. And even with organizations that anybody who's not absolutely using the word cloud native has some of those traditional jobs to still perform. So when I think about AI and ML is an exciting industry to be in. DevOps and IAC feels like a lot safer industry to be in. That's perhaps the way that I would describe it. But I think they're both very interesting. And in the end, I would choose one that speaks to my own personal interests on it. I came from a DevOps infrastructure as code world. And I am spending more and more time writing software and developing things that are closer and closer to the AI ML space. So I think as you mature through your lifetime and your career, you may find yourself moving to one of these or one of the others, which is really cool about the AWS platform, because you can still take your IAM understanding and your S3 understanding, and you can use those skills to adventure into new parts of technology, which is, I think, really cool about cloud in general, but even cooler about AWS because they have such a huge breadth of services there. So I think as a trainer, these are the types of questions I get the most often. People are like, how do I get a job? What are the best jobs? Where should I go career-wise? And I usually try to get them thinking, first of all, like, okay, is there something regionally? Like, is there a business in your town that you want to work for? So first of all, is that a thing that's happening? If not, wildest dreams, is there some company elsewhere that you would be willing to go and move to and work for? You know, I'm just trying to narrow this down because I get trainers and students from all over the place. And then the final ones that I would get into would be, okay, assuming there is something locally or you're willing to relocate, then what is the type of work you would like to do at that organization? And I really try to get people to dream about it big. Like, I want to work for Sega. I want to go work for Google. I want to go work for a software development company. I work for EA Games, whoever it is. Put that up on the target and say, okay, what sort of certifications do people who have those jobs have currently? And that's where you can begin doing some of your discovery work to begin understanding the path that you might try to take to get to something like that. And so I guess, Wentz, I have to come back being a consultant and say, it depends, but I would ask you more information about your path. Are you drawn to AI and ML because it's intriguing to you, or because there's a job that you can get right now in your town? And I think maybe you can see the difference behind part of that there. That's what I try to get people thinking about, is the balance between perfect scenario objectives and realistic employment. And a big immovable factor is whether or not you can work regionally. If you are able to work remote and you have the accreditation, you're highly employable globally. If you are willing to relocate, you gain a really big element of employability there as well. And if you've been in the industry, I'm probably preaching to the choir. A lot of you may have already realized some of this already, but those are some of the big things I try to get people thinking about first. You're moving then in a direction, and you can say whether or not this cert really helps you get there. Because I've chased certs for years, you know, and they didn't all get me anywhere. A lot of them were helpful. Other ones were ones that were challenges for me. It just depends. So unless it really helps you spin your gears and get traction, I would have to question going after any certifications until you have that objective in mind. Hopefully that's not me skirting the question too much there.
Nice. Hey,
I have a quick comment.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the industry for 30 plus years, going back with a telephony background with Bell Labs, software development and such. And then obviously the cloud's new to all of us over the last 5-10 years. And I was always kind of in the DevOps release management space. And now I'm in software development, and I just find it so difficult. You want to focus on your software development frameworks, and then at the same time you have to think about Docker, and then at the same time you have to think about your Maven and your YAML and all these other frameworks and everything. And many times I kind of feel like I'm a jack of many trades, master of absolutely none. And I guess my question is, it seems like people aren't really specializing anymore. They're going for this, like you said, the Salt Lake, be broad and, kind of thin in that, or would you still recommend, a deep dive in a few technologies?
Yeah, I honestly, I guess what I would say is, I'd say for me, part of what's made me successful in this industry is being able to do what you just described there. The idea that I can pick up a new technology, try to find its value, and understand how it kind of fits into a larger enterprise technology portfolio. That doesn't mean that I could train you on the deepest parts of that product, though. And I think you're right. one of the things that I challenged, I have a lot of friends who are CCIEs, and I am not going to put down that track. I would challenge to say that to be a professional architect in the cloud industry, you're practicing a level of generalization and diversity across a lot of different fields that's comparable to the types of specialization that you would see a CCIE go and pursue and obtain. It's one thing to know a subject extremely well. It's another thing to know 20 or 30 different topics that are related in a way that you can actually use them. And I think that's one of the things that you pointed out there. I don't think that we should steer clear of that. I think that IT has taught us that we can expect a moving horizon. And so being a generalist who is proficient at learning and using new tools is arguably the most important skill that we could try to hone in ourselves. And the people that I see that are really successful in this industry invariably have that skill. That's one of the big distinguishers that I see in them. The other big distinguisher for me is communication. Okay, we live in an increasingly people problem pinned world. The better you can communicate, the better you can help see the root of those issues and look for the actionable ways to help solve it. And if you've been around, through 30 years, you know just how many times it wasn't the technology that caused the problem. It was the people building a bad process or forcing a bad process to be maintained longer than it should that caused a lot of those problems. So I kind of would go that far as to say that, yeah, I think being a generalist and being a communicationalist are going to be really important skills in the cloud because there are so many ways that we can touch it. The final thing I would answer that with is that it depends on the companies you're working with. If I'm working for a large enterprise cloud solutions division at Accenture or something like that, and I really could work with a dozen different types of businesses throughout a year, that's where that generalist piece is really going to pay off. But if your organization specializes in a handful of products, then again, it may not be worthwhile being a generalist for those reasons. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying to Wentz is just a few minutes ago about what's the objective, what's the career path that you're on, and do those certifications support being a generalist. I guess the other thing too is when I talk to developers, there's an old adage that says that what developer do you hire? Do you hire the 15-year Java developer right now? Or do you hire the developer who is proficient in 10 different languages right now, but not great at any of them? And in most cases, their modern people are hiring someone with language and framework diversity over the deep specialist, which is an interesting blend. Now, again, it's going to be niche specific, but I think in general, we're seeing that is a big trend right now. Yeah.
Okay,
communicationist, yeah. Communicationistalists. That's a great observation, Dave. Absolutely. I think you're right on point for spotting it. Is it possible to get a job after my certification? Yeah,
Super
sure, Cater.
Question.
I think these will definitely help. Go ahead. What was that, Chris?
Oh, I was going to say I've helped a lot of people study for their certs and trying to help them, everything like that. That's a very loaded question. Back to your consulting answer, it depends. A certification can help you get a job. A certification will not get you a job. There are certain positions out there that the bare minimum requirement for a role, especially in the VAR space, is that you have to be certified so that they can get their partner status or something. But if you just study and you don't have some good experience and you want, we call them paper certs, people that just get a cert but haven't paper tigers. Those get quickly weeded out. You have to spend some time in the console, Cater. You have to even if it's just at home, working with the, munging through the stuff and learning the different skill sets and everything like that. A certification will not get you a job. A certification plus experience will help you to get a job. I've watched people try to do that. Say, okay, well, I'll get my SA associate, and I'll definitely guarantee to get a job. And it didn't work out. And you then drill into it to try to find out what was the miss there, and other things pop up. Not to call anybody out.
I would totally second what Chris said there. In general too, when I hear people say they want to get into the cloud, I almost always have to say, okay, and then what? Because getting into the cloud is like walking into the grocery store and saying, I'm hungry. It's like, okay, well, you need to go and have a plan now. What are you going to do? What are you going to buy? What are you going to get? How are you going to use it? What's the plan for it? So when I talk to people about getting into the cloud, it's more like, well, what part of that do you want? Do you want to support infrastructure? Do you like writing scripts? Do you like creating tools? Do you want to help manage the business side of this? Because there are tons of opportunities out there. But again, we're not sure until you begin looking at those particular objectives and say, what exam is going to help me get a job? And then what other skills do I need besides that AWS exam to get there? So I always really encourage people to never forget the Linux and Windows paradigm. You got to have one of those two skills somewhere in there. That's always going to go a long way.
Agreed.
Yep.
So a couple of things. Everybody that's in live attendance, we're trying to do a giveaway, and right now we only have 6 people that have completed the survey. So follow the link that Chris popped up on the poll, and the one that we put into the chat channel as well. And you'll be in line to win the gift certificate for the credits. And I also want to call out the fact that this little meeting of the Portsmouth AWS user group has got attendees far and wide. We currently have an attendee listening from Novi Sad, Serbia. Like they're in Serbia listening right now, or watching, attending. His name is Strahinja. Hi, Stra. Nice to see you.
Hey, everyone.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
His town is renowned for making an amazing honey mead, and I have some of it in my wet bar right now.
Man, that sounds amazing. Be still my honey mead heart.
Oh, nice. Okay, Mr. Planky, how many people do we have filling out the survey now?
We are up to 11 entries. We had 24 attendees. If folks are still filling out the survey, do you want to just maybe raise your hand here? I know I'm sure asking you to do something else isn't helpful. Just want to make sure we give folks enough time here to wrap this up. Okay, so there are a few folks going through the survey, so I'll wait just another minute or two here to complete that. You were able, if you have to leave right, submitted the form, your email is there, we have you, we trust you. We will be able to send you a code. So there are $25 AWS credits. We'll wrap through them here. And I'm just gonna wait another minute or so to allow people to finish. Nice. I believe when you leave Zoom as well, you may be prompted to fill out the survey. I've never done that before, but it let me ask you guys to fill out a survey. So sorry if it puts you or anything like that. But we are looking for feedback to make these better in the future.
Yeah, and